Always true.
For decades, the world has framed its biggest environmental crisis as a fight against climate change. But many scientists say the deeper story is about something more fundamental: biodiversity. Sandra Myrna Diaz is one of the world's most influential scientists specializing in ecology. She served on the UN Scientific Advisory Board since 2023. Diaz calls biodiversity the fabric of life itself: plants, animals, water, and the soil that sustains everything we do, from the food we eat to the air we breathe. And it's unravelling at unprecedented speed. So what happens when governments make lofty promises, but biodiversity targets continue to be missed? And can humanity rethink its consumerism-driven way of life before the very foundation of our planet collapse? Ecologist Sandra Myrna Diaz talks to Al Jazeera. Sandra Diaz, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. You have been studying biodiversity for decades now. What can you tell us about how serious is the damage? How much damage has been done?
The damage to the fabric of life on the planet is massive. It's massive and it's fast. And that is a direct damage to humanity because, of course, we are part of that fabric. And the damage we do to nature, we do to ourselves as well.
When you mean the fabric of life, this is a term that you have been using over and over again. Can you explain to us, what does it mean?
Over history, we have had different narratives of what nature is. You have the idea of nature as purely utilitarian. You know, it's a bunch of resources, a bunch of objects for us to exploit as we please. You have other ideas of nature, which is lost paradise out there, perfect until we got into the picture and ruined the whole thing. But all these views, opposite as they look, rest on the same assumption, that is, humanity is completely separate from the rest of life on Earth. But we have overwhelming evidence that this is not the case. We have very, very strong evidence that humans are inextricably entangled with other life. So, because of all this entanglement, we talk about life on Earth. We talk about the fabric of life on Earth. Because if I say biodiversity, it's a technical term. Of course, we use it in technical work, but it doesn't start to convey all this meaning of interaction and co-shaping. It doesn't resonate emotionally with people the same way as the fabric of life on Earth. That's why we use it.
When you talk about the impact on biodiversity, I mean, which activity damages the most? I mean, I can imagine that you've been studying the impact that humans have on different areas around the world.
If you do a world ranking, the most impactful one so far has been changes in the use of land and coasts. Then there is the direct exploitation of organisms: hunting, fishing, selective logging. And then you have pollution other than greenhouse gases and climate change. Climate change hasn't been the main one historically, but is increasingly getting more and more important and interacting in synergistic ways with other factors. And you also have the impact of invasive alien species. Of course, the importance in different areas of the world changes. For example, towards the poles, climate change is much more important. Close to the equator, land use change is more important. In oceanic islands, invasive species are more important.
Does preserving biodiversity also helps in the fight against climate change? I mean, is it connected?
Of course they are. Of course they are. Climate change, biodiversity, and the decline of nature, the decline of biodiversity, and even the increasing socioeconomic inequalities among people on Earth, these three major crises are all connected. They all synergize each other and they all have the same root causes.
If we continue at this pace with destruction of the environment and destruction of biodiversity, what do you think we're going to see in 20, 30 years from now?
Well, we are looking at a much worse world for all people in decades' time, or let alone 100 years' time. A much less rich, a much poorer, a much less interesting, a much less functional world for the vast majority of us.
Do you think governments are listening to scientists about what they're saying is happening?
If you look at what they are officially saying, I would say yes, the vast majority of them are listening. But if you look at what they are actually doing about it, I would definitely say they are not listening enough, or maybe they are listening at the same time to a much louder message from the dominant model of appropriation of nature that is basically the root cause of the climate crisis, of the biodiversity crisis, and of the increasing inequalities among people.
The United States has recently withdrawn with the Trump administration, the United States, from the Paris Climate Agreements. What message do you think this sends to the world?
Well, they gave a message of impotence and doom, so to speak, because they have a lot of power and they are responsible for a very, very big portion of the emissions, both domestic and global. So definitely it didn't help. We hope that other countries will fill the vacuum, and we also hope this position won't last more than a few years.
Even here in Argentina, the government of Javier Milei, in fact, Javier Milei has said that that climate change is a socialist lie. What would you say to that?
I think we are talking about a phenomenon that is happening in several places in the world, which is denialism. Fortunately, there is only a small number of governments that have that position around the world. Although they can be vociferous, they can be dangerous. I think today, in the face of the overwhelming evidence showing the pervasiveness and speed of the decline in living nature, climate change, there's no room anymore for honest skepticism. That may have been the case a couple of decades ago. But now, I think that not believing in these trends is denialism, deliberate ignorance of the facts. Ignorance that may come from obscurantism, or probably more often follows vested interests.
Do you think that this could have an impact on, for example, investment in investigation or investment in more research? Is the US, withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and the vision they have about climate change, etc.? I mean, do you think it could have an impact on, research around the world, or preservation even?
I think it will have an impact. I think that divesting from science in general is a very good way to keep society quiet. It's a very good way to keep people from being empowered by knowledge and doing something for a better and fairer future.
Do you think that the fact that rich countries ask poor countries to preserve biodiversity while they're still promoting consumption at home, what do you think of that?
There's a lot of negative reactions to that, and understandably so, because one would expect that those with more wealth and more power and more resources should lead by example. So the others that are more vulnerable and have much more limited resources would then be encouraged to follow. So far we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that. This preaching but not practicing by the most powerful and the richest countries shouldn't, though, be used as an excuse by the poorer countries just to sit back and wait and say, we do nothing, we deny the situation until the others do enough. It's understandable that sometimes we take that position, but that is destructive. A better future for all demands that everyone does as much as they can.
The Global South has the majority of the biodiversity around the world, but still they do not have the resources to protect it in many cases. What do you think should be done? I mean, should there be more assistance to help them protect, biodiversity in those countries?
Well, life on Earth is everybody's responsibility. Many countries in the Global South, so to speak, still have all those species, all those ecosystems, all these living wealth. It's everybody's responsibility to keep it. It's important to realize that sometimes what happens with the biodiversity in a country is the product of a lot of local pressures. So it's the country's responsibility to do something about it. But a lot of what is going on biodiversity in the world is the product of remote influences. Something like a third of the threats to animals all over the world are not produced by local consumption. They are driven by demand from other countries. So some countries look like having a perfect record, doing all the right things domestically. But if you look at their global footprint on carbon, on water, on life, on human life too, on human well-being too, you see this massive. So that's why we, in every forum we manage to say something, I personally advocate for having the footprints of countries accounted for not only domestically, but globally. I think that would go a long way.
Multinational corporations are responsible for deforestation, for pollution. How do we find balance between protecting biodiversity and corporate greed?
I think you said the key word, greed. A balance is possible between human needs, between honorable consumption, between making sure that everybody has quite enough for their needs and for their flourishing, and other life on Earth. But there's no possible balance between endless greed and life on Earth. I said that at the root of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis and the inequality crisis, there is one root problem. And that root cause is the predominant model of appropriation of nature, of human and non-human life. This model that puts immediate and maximum profit for a privileged few over the common good, over life on Earth. The model that is partly embedded by the corporations you were talking about. This model is insatiable. It never has enough. It's blind to anything that is not profit. As long as sheer all grid rules, as far as there's no boundaries for this endless appetite for more and more wealth, there's no balance. It's incompatible in the long or even in the medium term with a fair and good future for people and planet.
How do we change it?
How do we change it? First of all, it can be changed.
It can.
It can. That's the important thing. It's not inevitable. It can. The first thing we all try to do, and there are many, many good examples around the world, is deal with immediate symptoms, like first aid or like intensive care. You deal urgently with the symptoms because otherwise the patient suffers horribly or dies, right? So we keep doing, creating nature reserves. We save species from the brink of extinction with sophisticated technology. We plant trees in our neighborhoods. We keep compost heaps at home. We change the light bulbs for more efficient ones. And all these things are good, are useful and powerful, but they are by far not enough in the face of the speed and the scale of the damage being done by this predominant model. We need to deal with the symptoms, but we also need to go for the root causes. One way to go for the root causes is called mainstreaming. Mainstreaming climate, mainstreaming nature. Mainstreaming, I know, is not the most beautiful of words. It means incorporating considerations for nature, safeguards, regulations, the respect, the care for nature or the climate, not only in environmental policy, but in all the workings of society. In trade policy, in energy and transport and infrastructure policy, in the law, in the way we design the fashion, in the way we design cities. Basically, as well as trying to patch up emergencies, we need to stop the massive harm that is done to life, to human and non-human life every day. That is what the mainstreaming for. Of course, it's a massive undertaking. It cannot be done by only one sector. It requires concerted action. It requires collective action.
How important do you think that international cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation, how necessary is it for it to promote change worldwide?
I think it's indispensable. I cannot see a better future happening without it, because the scale of the problems we have is global. It's not within any particular country. And we know that what happens with the climate and nature in any particular country depends on what other countries are doing. And of course, global change is global. I think intergovernmental cooperation, we may argue how is the best way to do it, right? Obviously has to keep evolving. So I would say probably we need more than intergovernmental processes and bodies, but we cannot have a better future without them.
We're seeing like this obsession in the Western world with green growth. Do you think it's just, it's another way of greenwashing? I mean, do you think there's real interest in that change, or is it just public relations?
As long as sheer old greed rules, I think it will outpace even the greenest attempts. There are very legitimate, honest, powerful and useful attempts to make things better, right? But without targeting the root of the problem, without targeting the mother, right? That we cannot just devour everything in the world, human, non-human lives, materials, everything in the world, for the sake of profit. As soon as this is not tackled, as soon as this is not constrained somehow, all we will achieve is a decrease of the amount of energy, lives, material suffering per unit of whatever is consumed. Right? We will consume more, cleanly. Maybe we can make our consumption less toxic, less harmful to people. But in the end, there are physical limits to that, because the planet is physically limited. And this is not an ideological position. Yeah. The fact that the model is inviable, as I say, in the medium to the longer term, is shown by virtually every single Earth system model. Very, very kind of quantitatively biophysical models. And there's no way. If anything, the ideological thing is trying to implant in people's minds the idea that, yes, we can keep consuming everything, no matter how unnecessary it is, we can keep just making money, and there will be a prosperous future for all of us. That's a big, big lie.
Do you think that sustainable development exists, or it's just, a lie that we tell ourselves because our lives are not sustainable? I mean, wherever you look, you see lots of violations in things that have been regulated in the past.
I think green growth and sustainable development are two very good examples of concepts that were created with the best of intentions, but were subsequently appropriated, perverted, corrupted, hijacked by, again, the dominant model of voracious appropriation and endless profit. They have been appropriated, and sometimes they are used like a very thin coat of paint over the real purpose of things. And this is not helping people. This is not helping humanity. It's just another way of making money. It's interesting to see how this model not only has appropriated materials and lives, it also appropriates our best meaning concepts.
Some critics say that the biodiversity crisis is a question of power. Who uses the resources, who profits? What do you think of that?
I agree. I think history, and particularly the history of social movements, tell us two things. First, it tells us that it is the balance of power in societies, not just enough knowledge, what really changes the status quo. And the second thing that history tells us is that it's not like those in power one day wake up and have an epiphany and decide to change things for the common good. Whatever big social victories happened, civil rights, gender rights, workers' rights, the abolition of slavery, you name it, better conditions in terms of human well-being, etc., happened not as concessions of power, spontaneously from power to people, but because of people's demand, because people spoke up, people pushed back, because of the pressure of the many. Having said that, this doesn't mean knowledge is useless. I think knowledge is indispensable. The role of those that are producing knowledge in trying to make the right questions and making sure the empowering knowledge ends up in the hands of people who can push for it is indispensable, but it's not enough.
Do you think that young people right now are more active in pushing for caring for the environment, protecting biodiversity?
I think that in the face of what has to be done to have a better future is so overwhelming that there is this widespread feeling of impotence and doom, especially among young people. There is this feeling, this sense that the future has disappeared. And I don't think that is the case. I don't think it has disappeared. I think it has just been kidnapped by those behind the model of voracious appropriation and endless profit. They have imposed this vision of a future in which they are okay, but there's not much room for the majority of us. But the future is not decided yet. And that, I think, is the important thing that especially young people, everybody, but especially young people have to keep in mind.
When you see the world today, and you see a country like Argentina, for example, but it's happening in many other countries around the world, where the government insists that the way forward, the way for development is through extraction of natural resources, oil, gas, lithium. And that's the only way, it seems. What do you say to those governments?
This is what I mean when I say they have kidnapped the future. They have imposed a narrative that the only alternative is that. This is only progress for those who make money out of it. There is, again, compatibility between a satisfied life and other people, and a satisfied life, another life on Earth, but it's not compatible with endless greed.
Sandra Diaz, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for inviting me.